Today I'd like to return to a theme implicit in presenting my UU vision a few years ago. As you know, I'm a refugee from Mormonism and do not believe that Mormonism is true. Nevertheless, I think that sociologically there are useful lessons to be drawn from Mormonism. At the congregational level, Mormonism draws extra strength from a lay ministry in which almost every member of the congregation takes on a serious church assignment. What is perhaps even more remarkable is that Mormonism has a largely lay pulpit. On the first Sunday of every month, Mormon meetings are organized a bit like Quaker meetings, in which anyone who feels moved to speak is encouraged to speak. The other Sundays, speakers are prearranged with the duty of speaking rotating gradually through the entire congregation. Needless to say, the quality of sermons is often not that high, but even the most dull of sermons allows people to get to know the speaker a bit better, and so helps to bind the congregation together a bit more strongly. So I kind of miss that aspect of Mormonism in Unitarianism. I don't think that that exact pattern would suit Unitarian Universalism all that well, but I do think it would be a very good thing to gradually increase the set of opportunities and the gentle encouragement for members of a congregation to prepare and share their thoughts with the whole congregation. In addition to sharing credos and reports of congregational activities and events in our lives, I'm advocating the invention of additional forms of sharing, such as sharing UU visions, and today what I would like to call sharing epiphanies. So in other words, what I'm trying to do here is to invent a form that won't be too scary to do, where you could actually imagine to have an assignment to do a talk like this. So let me try to define this a little better. According to dictionary.com, it's nice to have everything one Google away these days. One definition of epiphany is an appearance or manifestation of a deity. And certainly if any one of you sees God, I hope you would share that experience. But what I have in mind is something much more modest. A more workaday meaning of epiphany is a sudden intuitive perception or insight into the reality or essential meaning of something, usually initiated by some simple, homely, or commonplace occurrence or experience. In other words, this kind of epiphany is a life lesson that comes by surprise in the ordinary course of life. In order to keep things interesting, let me insist on one essential characteristic of an epiphany. An epiphany should involve a clear change from thinking one way to thinking another way. Indeed, the most interesting epiphanies often involve a 180-degree reversal in thinking. So to identify an epiphany in your own life, it pays to look for cases where you used to think something that you now think is wrong in an important way. Our former minister, Ken Pfeiffer, made a point of having exactly 3 subpoints within a section of a sermon. So taking that as my guide, I tried to think of 3 epiphanies in my life. Let me start with how I learned to respect positive thinking. I was a very serious-minded child, and as a teenager looked down on positive thinking because I felt it conflicted with facing reality squarely. That is, I was afraid that positive thinking would make me an unrealistic Pollyanna, not a very macho image. Then, among my mother's many books on pop psychology, I ran across the book Psycho-Cybernetics by the plastic surgeon Maxwell Maltz. So online, I saw this was supposed to be a classic of self-help. But anyway, it must have sold a fair number of copies. Maxwell Maltz argued that imagining things going well was a way of practicing for good outcomes. For example, he pointed to experiments in which people who imagined in detail the actions involved in sinking free throws gained almost as much skill as those who physically practiced. It's hard to get across the effect this had on me. What I got from the book was that I could be a positive thinker and a flinty-eyed realist at the same time. The key was to realize that the positive thoughts were not a description of reality, but only a way to exercise my imagination to help me be ready in case something good happened. Without contradiction, I could alternate between thinking like a flinty-eyed realist and thinking like a dyed-in-the-wool optimist, and so be prepared for anything. Fortunately, though I sometimes forget this, I found that spending a small fraction of the time being a flinty-eyed realist is enough to be prepared for the worst. Then I can spend the rest of the time being a cheerful optimist and definitely be prepared for the best. My ship may never come in, but if it does, I'll be ready. For my other 2 epiphanies, fast forward to this past year. This past year has been a big year for me in a very bad way. You may remember my son Spencer, who came with me on my last visit here, the one with the red hair. Last September, Spencer committed suicide. My daughter Diana wrote about Spencer's death on her blog at dianakimball.com for those of you who want to know more. Needless to say, this was a big blow to us. I'm both consoled and urged to patience by my research on happiness with co-authors, which suggests that in 2 years, we will be most of the way back toward feeling normal. After Spencer's death, there were many nights I couldn't sleep, so I built giant geometric shapes out of magnetics, a magnetic building torso, about this big, and they're all held together by magnets. During the day, I increased my rate of reading books 3 or 4 times over. Right before Spencer's death, I'd read the book Intelligence and How to Get It, Why Schools and Cultures Count, by the University of Michigan psychology professor Richard Nisbett. After Spencer's death, in addition to reading a fantasy novel and several books on Roman history, I followed that up with 2 books with the titles Talent is Overrated, What Really Separates World-Class Performers from Everybody Else, by Jeff Colvin, and The Talent Code, Greatness Isn't Born, It's Grown, Here's How, by Daniel Coyle. These 3 books all had the same basic point. Intelligence, talent, and skill are not fixed quantities we're born with, but are the outcomes of diligent effort and careful practice that focuses in on improving each weak point. And by the way, there's another wonderful book in this vein called The Art of Learning by Josh Whiteskin, who was a chess prodigy. Yeah, my other son, Jordan, enjoyed that, as well as the rest of us in the family. All talking about exactly how you do that practice. The thought that intelligence was more a matter of having opportunities and taking opportunities to do hard intellectual work than of just being born smart came as a shock and a revelation to me. Since I was young, my identity has been wrapped up in being the smartest kid on the block. And there's no question that, like most Americans, but unlike most Chinese or Japanese, I assumed that being smart was something I was born with and only had to demonstrate. As I look back now, I noticed the vast number of hours I spent reading the World Book Encyclopedia, working on math problems, reading Isaac Asimov books on science and history, and walking around trying to think deep thoughts. But since I believed my level of intelligence was a quantity determined at birth, I was careful not to work too hard at my schoolwork, lest I give the lie to the idea that I was just naturally talented. It was okay to spend a lot of time studying things that would come up in future classes. That was just fun. But I would lose face if I studied too hard for the classes I was actually in. I say all of this just to indicate how firmly I believed that intelligence was a fixed inborn quantity. And I think that's very common in America. I remember how surprised I was when one of my locker partners, whom I thought of as an ordinary kid, showed up as a graduate student in paleontology at Harvard when I was studying economics there. When his interest moved in an intellectual direction, he became extremely successful academically, and after being one of Stephen Jay Gould's students, now has a fascinating career digging up fossils at exotic locations and teaching geology at the University of South Dakota. Believing that intelligence is a fixed inborn quantity causes many students to give up, thinking they can never learn. The psychologists Lisa Blackwell, Callie Terzhnivsky, and Carol Dweck went into a school and divided the students into 2 groups. One group was taught that studying could rewire the brain and raise intelligence. The idea that intelligence can be changed led these students to study harder and get better grades. The effect was especially strong for students who started out believing most strongly that intelligence is genetically determined. In Richard Nisbett's words, Carol Dweck reported that some of her tough junior high school boys were reduced to tears by the news that their intelligence was substantially under their own control. Those boys had an epiphany. My third epiphany came from an unusual source. After a child dies, many families feel the urge to move to a different house so they won't be beset by painful memories at every turn. I hate moving, so we didn't even think seriously about that. Maybe Gail did, but you have to do herself. What we did was clean house. Before coming under my wife Gail's influence, I was a pack rat, son of a pack rat. Gail, while good at letting go and getting rid of things to begin with, gained extra inspiration from watching the cable TV show Clean House, in which the lives of pack rats are transformed on camera. In fact, I think one of the stars of that show has been on Dancing with the Stars, and she just got knocked out recently, but Niecy. I don't watch the show very much, but I know that much. I can't reproduce Gail's pep talks about the virtues of slimming down our stock of things, but I know that it felt good to get rid of things, which I found a little surprising. Our house is on a major street, so we were able to put things out front with a free sign on them and watch them disappear within hours. That was satisfying. I carted many boxes of books to the library to give to the used bookstore that the Friends of the Library run. We took pictures of keepsakes we'd been hanging onto for a long time and then gave them away or threw them out. I brought everything down from the attic for critical examination to see whether it should stay or go. What's been the most interesting about the whole process of cleaning a house is the way the questions that come up in choosing whether to keep something or get rid of it are questions about what I want to do with the rest of my life. Every time I decide to keep something, it's a reminder of something I want to do. Those reminders came together with my determination in the wake of Spencer's death to do more of the things I've wanted to, but haven't gotten to. Besides building geometric shapes with magnetics and reading regular books, I've made time to gradually work my way through a book on number theory, and for some reason, I've been doggedly working my way through a stack of articles I'd torn out of the Wall Street Journal to read later. I'm determined to learn French. At least I bought the software program to do so. But overall, the theme for me is that everything that I've wanted to do should flow. Nothing that I really want to do should be totally stopped and blocked. I'm at a point in my career where there's no reason to think that next year or the year after that will be any less busy than this year. So if I want to do something before I retire, I need to build it into my schedule now. In a concept from the show Clean House, each object is a promise to oneself. It's often hard to get rid of old things because unused things represent broken promises to do something. Promises to oneself need to be resolved one way or another. For each ancient promise, I need to either keep the promise or reconsider and release myself from the promise. No one is perfect. More to the point, we're all finite. We'll never have time enough to do all the things that we might like to do. This is one of those lessons that I resist so much that I have to learn it over and over and over again. This third epiphany I can express by telling the story of my kindly neighbor from the street where I lived as a teenager. He said something amounting to when you grow up, you'll be able to do anything. Naive as I was, my heart misheard this as when you grow up, you'll be able to do everything. But there is all the difference in the world between anything and everything. We have to choose. We might be able to have a lot, but we can't have it all. What we do with the few years we have on this earth before we go to our grave determines, along with luck, which of all our dreams will become real and which of our dreams will remain only dreams. Don't let the dreams that are most precious to you slip away if you can help it. As a first step, you need to figure out which dreams are the ones that are most important to you. Then, most painfully, you'll have to figure out which dreams you can let go. This same exercise of sorting through dreams and letting go of some needs to happen also at the collective level of families and congregations and nations in ways that often affect in turn which individual dreams can be realized. There's no easy way to make these decisions, but they have to be made. For those of us lucky enough to be part of democratic families, congregations, and nations, and I'm grateful to be part of a church that's democratic, the more we share what is in our hearts, the more likely it will be that dreams widely shared will prevail in those collective decisions. And in my own individual life, the more often I remind myself of what is truly important to me and act accordingly, the more likely I am to get there. Thank you very much.